When I was a kid, I used to sing soprano. I also used to belt out Disney songs with my mom, and I sang all the female lead songs, like all of them, and I loved it. My favorite was absolutely Meg's from Hercules. I had this genuine delight in singing that high, and how easy it was, and how fun it was. And then my voice changed, and that part of my life is gone now, never to return. But it really isn't that simple. It'd be one thing if it were a clean break, right? Like if it was just out of my life and that was that, but I feel it. Every time I hear a song in the register I used to have, my body holds on to the memories of it, like how to sing like that, my now absent head voice. There's more to singing than just, my vocal cords changing. The way I understood how to sing has just fundamentally changed entirely, and I didn't want to learn how to sing like a guy. I wanted that voice back. Transistor is, in many ways, an almost immaculate experience. To briefly summarize, it's a game about a famous singer known as Red, who's attacked at a club, which results in her nameless partner getting killed by this high-tech sword called the Transistor, which then uploads his consciousness into it. Red takes the sword, and while her partner communicates through it to her, telling her to escape the city as a plague descends upon it, processing everything, Red turns around and heads back in. She is presumably on a mission to get back at the people who took her partner and her voice from her, a way to reclaim what was stolen from her and, hey, maybe even save the city because this goddamn plague is destroying it. Maybe, we don't know, but more on that later. It is hard to engage with this game in a way that isn't in some way comparing it to Supergiant's first game and breakout success, Bastion. And we can go down that way, sure, particularly because it does seem to almost have a bone to pick with Bastion, where Bastion made the concept of killing something weighty and grim, the narrator shaming you for defiling stone husks of long-deceased people, the haunting feeling of seeing the bodies of the Aura you kill stay on the ground in a pool of blood, the whole, colonialism and genocide thing I talked about in my Bastion video. Transistor opens with a dead body and an implicit promise for vengeance. Red is not here to be a story about the moral ethics of taking another person's life, because her life has been ripped from her at the start of the game, and she's going to get it back, no matter what. Where Bastion had the kid who could roll and block and swing all sorts of weapons around with relative ease, clearly grown up knowing how to use these big tools, Red has to drag the Transistor around everywhere she goes, the weight of her task literally physically manifested. Even the combat seems to be a specific departure from Bastion, which, features really smooth, pleasant, responsive combat. In comparison, the combat in Transistor is clunky. You have a dodge, but it's slow, and it leaves you immobile for a bit. Your attacks are all slower than in Bastion, and to replace all of this is the turn function, where you pause the game and essentially program out your next move, with the trade-off that is that you can't use any of the moves at all until your turn bar recharges. It's all sort of reminiscent of Bastion, different abilities, moves, but it's still an isometric. It all kind of hints at it, but playing it like you play Bastion can suck. And I've had some friends complain about it, saying that the combat is worse because of how different it is, which it is different, but I appreciate that it's making a point to remind you that you aren't playing Bastion, and there's a lot of clarity of purpose in why Red fights the way she does. She isn't a laborer and or enforcer like the kid maybe was. I couldn't do the extra combat stuff in Bastion for the deep lore, forgive me. She's a singer. She's not trained for combat, she's just sticking it out because she wants her life back, her voice, her partner, right? You see, hidden in this game, constantly burning away just under the surface, is this struggle to really understand Red, and it's something that my first time playing, I didn't even really register, because again, Bastion was still fresh in my head, and you kind of figure from that mindset that this framing of the game is functionally evoking the same narrative style of Bastion, with a narrator kind of just telling us everything we need to know. That worked in Bastion because most of it was told in past tense, as a series of events that had already happened, so Rux had genuine knowledge of what happened through every step of the game. Red's partner, he's narrating in the present, and even then he's narrating by necessity, trying to keep communicating with his now voiceless partner. And if you are going into Transistor with this framework in mind, it can be easy to intuit narrative beats. Like, okay, you see Red silently pulling the sword out of the body at the start. You hear the Transistor speaking, and after the first stage, he makes a comment about fleeing the city, only for Red to not take the exit. He makes a comment about the Camerata, and guesses that she's not out to escape, but perhaps is out for revenge. I'm actually going to pause here for a moment, I'm sorry, because if y'all remember in my last Bastion video, which 6 of you saw, I guess, I brought up loosely conversations about games that moralize violence in their narrative, briefly mentioning The Last of Us 1 and 2, and I think what Tlu gives us is a more interesting story than just, is it good when games tell you to feel bad about violence by making you do it? If we're ready to go on a bit of a journey, yeah, okay. There is a common assumption in most games. Notoriously, games with silent protagonists. The character you control in a game is supposed to, on some level, be a reflection of yourself in the game. This implication can be, in many ways, heightened by games encouraging that, either by giving you dialogue options or branching narrative decisions, keeping the protagonist otherwise silent to invite you to fill in what you may be thinking of communicating to the other characters. But it is all ultimately an assumption, at least in some cases. Most cases, however, if they really want to lean into it, they do sort of a half-in, half-out thing. Be it Commander Shepard, Byleth, Joker, you're given some choices and some direction on how you want the character to go. But it's constructed, obviously, because, having true agency as a main character is almost impossible to account for in a written narrative. Now, this is all well and good for games that have self-inserts, and, things get a bit different when you have scripted player characters. But also, maybe not. Okay, question. Are the main characters, even ones with distinct personalities, self-inserts? Are you supposed to feel like the character you're controlling is a reflection of you? This is a very, very weird question to deal with, because I don't really think many games are consciously having this conversation. It's really easy to look at a lot of character action games that center around a bold personality, but are structured to make you empathize and connect with them, to put yourself in the shoes of who you're playing, even if you're not literally them. That's, kind of basic stuff, but what happens when creators want to complicate that dynamic? Going back to Transistor, I've said a lot about the plot in kind of a vague way, because by necessity, that's really the best I can do, because Red, while being a very literal silent protagonist, is not a self-insert. Where the narrative of other titles like Persona or Mass Effect or Dragon Age want to center your character and make them feel inviting to empathize with, you make very, very few choices for Red. Literally the only decisions you make are the expedient choices of an isometric action game, how to deal with the next combat scenario and such, and trivial decisions like what do you want on your pizza. In this way, the game reveals that you're more like the Transistor than Red, speculating on why she's making the choices she's making, but without the ability to change her mind. And for the most part, a lot of assumptions seem to be right. You do go and find members of the Camerata, you fight Sybil, you confront Grant and Asher, and you have a big showdown with Royce. And at the end of it all, Red recreates her partner's body, sits down next to it, and despite all the begging and pleading from her partner, from what's left of him now, she kills herself in order to have her mind downloaded into it as well, finally reuniting with him in the country, so to speak. This ending made me weep, and it's a lot to unpack. I bring this up now because where you had choices in Bastion, the game weighing on you to consider what the best course of action is, this game doesn't. This is the end of it. And, I've seen some scattered mild criticisms about how this game doesn't feel as empowering as Bastion does because you don't have any effect on the narrative at large. This is the point. You're not here to be Red. You're here to help her, to watch her, to empathize with her, but not to take on her actions as your own. This is why I brought up The Last of Us, because a similar thing is happening here. You're not supposed to feel burdened by the actions Red takes in the story, because this isn't about making Red's story about you and what you would have done, and whether or not her actions mesh neatly with your own. Where you had a pretty distinct influence on the decisions of the kid in Bastion, you just don't here. And if the game has gotten you sufficiently hooked like it did with me, that final moment where maybe you're begging along with her partner to please don't do this, it hits so powerfully because it's an absolute refutation of your power over the silent protagonist. I also don't really know where else to put this, but let's do another intermission. I'm really sorry. I keep saying Red is a silent protagonist, and she is, but not in the same way like Link is, or Mario is, or the kid, or the reader, you get it, but I bring this up now because the game is constantly reminding you of this fact. Beyond the surface details of her losing her voice very literally, and her being a famous singer, the game adds a button that pretty much just lets you hum. This decision is firstly, great. The game kind of fades out a bit, and you just get to sit with the music and take it in. This game honestly has a ton of moments where you're encouraged to just breathe a bit and look at it, and it's lovely. It's also a subtle point that your impulse to feel like you must be Red because she doesn't talk and you control her in the level is misguided. She can't speak because her voice was taken, but that doesn't mean that her agency was taken as well. Okay, I want to pause in the middle of this pause to gently poke at a statement made by Commander Sterling of the Jimquisition in their recent-ish video on Hades.
But in some of their games, I've often felt there's just this touch of style over substance where the music especially is doing most of the emotional legwork to enhance what you're experiencing. Whereas in Hades, yes, the music is absolutely excellent, but it doesn't feel like it's doing all of the heavy lifting to get me invested in what I'm seeing.
Now, look, okay, a couple of things. This isn't an epic takedown of Sterling. I genuinely appreciate their work. I think they're a net positive on the world. None of this is vindictive, and, I respect their opinions, but I do disagree on the point they make about how Supergiant uses music as a crutch for weaker storytelling. I think the two are more often not easily disentangled from each other. Transistor is a great example of this. There is a beautiful harmony between the music and the narrative. There's a reason why these stories are apparently crafted in close collaboration with the sound design. And before I kick us off into the meat of it, this humming, this free little moment to take a step back from it all, breathe, listen to the sound of the game around you, it already shows in microcosm what I mean. That function is technically non-essential. You don't really need to hum to unlock a door or beat a boss or win the game, but it's an invitation to witness. You can't move while humming either. It's a free moment to kind of gently remove yourself from the experience of controlling Red and let the world get into you just a little bit. All while subtly reminding you that you can control Red in many ways, but you cannot fundamentally change her. Okay, I'm not gonna get away with talking about a Supergiant game and not bring up the music in it. This game's music is obviously on the surface incredibly technically harmonious with the world it was written for. Okay, here's an example. The song In Circles is written partially in 5/4, which creates this off-kilter waltz vibe to it, and I think it's because waltzes are in 3/4 or 6/8, which give it that 1-2-3 energy to it, and 5/4 offsets that by one beat. This, in conjunction with the chorus snapping into 3/4 and then back into 5/4, it's just a great way to, in the words of Darren Korb, the composer and sound designer for Supergiant, include some math into the construction of the music. That's all well and good, But I am calling out Commander Sterling for a music take I gently disagree with. So the thing here is that it's not just technically impressive, but it adheres really remarkably well to the story. See, I mentioned up top that this plague was processing the city, and in my usual habit, I refuse to clarify further.
Why elaborate on that?
No.
But this plague is a very specific kind of hell. It is essentially coding everything it can in the physical world into data, stripping buildings, streets, bridges of their identity, and when it infects people, it turns them into weapons. It takes a summation of who they are, their biggest accomplishments, and converts that into data that the Transistor can use to fight. Lillian will never be a person again. The process has stripped her identity down to what she can contribute to it, what resources she provides, and has cataloged, or in many ways removed, everything else. This is all to say that a recurring, looming element of this game is the idea of these things that are irreplaceably human. People, buildings, technology, and even music. They're all getting stripped away here, and infected by this plague that removes us from ourselves. And, just a reminder that this game came out in 2014. The sound design, the songs themselves are crafted as these chilling allusions to the story, and they do all of this by doing something utterly pretentious and high-minded, but God, I fucking love it. Okay, so, okay. Diegesis. So, roughly speaking, diegesis refers to every real element of a fictional piece of work. Long story short, and this is lifted hard from Lindsay Ellis here, but most film scores, for example, are non-diegetic, in that the actors in insert popular action film here aren't literally listening to the soundtrack playing, whereas something like Good Night and Good Luck's score is mostly, if not entirely, diegetic, in that the music you're listening to comes from a jazz singer at the station the film takes place in. So the question is, are Red's songs diegetic or not? Now, on the surface, that's kind of an easy question to answer. Yes, she's a singer, she's famous for her songs, those songs physically must exist in the world. That's a pretty fair conclusion to come to. Whether or not she's listening to them in every moment they play in the game is up for debate, but, most likely not, bing bang boom, but even saying all of that out loud, I feel like that's kind of a flimsy point to make. She is a singer. There is a record player in the break room you can gain tracks for, sure, but these songs are all weirdly prophetic, or at least observant of the narrative unfolding. If they are diegetic, then she's singing about things that haven't really come to pass. And if they're not, then why? Why include that she's a singer and have music that cannot reasonably exist? And the entire reason we can even really have this debate is that while these songs are very on the nose in a lot of places, they are also just vague enough to keep you guessing. You can hear these thoughts, and how you connect to them and subsequently connect them to the game you're playing is ultimately kind of speculative. Maybe the spine is a metaphor, and it's just a weird coincidence that there's a boss fight with a process called the spine. Now, I worry that this segment is going to come off as a little, deep lore intensive, I'm trying to mine this game for tidbits so I can go on Reddit and argue that this canonically proves that Red is some kind of prophet, which I'm not. I bring this up because the endpoint of that line of thought for me brings me right back to how we engage with Red. Just like the music she sings, we also can really only speculate on her, think about what she's doing and why, and the game never really gives us the truth. We never get an epilogue where Red explains why she didn't turn left, why she fought the Camerata, why she decided to end her life to be with her partner in the Transistor. Her and her music are the same. In a way, the game foretells her fate by drawing this parallel between her and her creativity. She's pretty much always humming. Losing her voice is like losing a fundamental half of herself, because it is deeply intertwined with who she fundamentally is as a person. A while back, I had a friend try out the game, and he pointed out that it was in many ways a retelling of the Orpheus myth with a neat twist, and Sure, like, beautiful singer goes on a perilous journey through certain death in order to get her loved one back, only to find out that she never can. Sure, and through that interpretation, just like Hades Town, just like Sarah rules Eurydice, just like Persona 3, shut up, it sort of works, listen, at the end of the Transistor, like, the ending of it is predetermined. Red's quest was doomed from the start, but I feel like a lot of the conversations I've tended to have about this game does something weird in discussing it. And this isn't a call out of my friend or of men or whatever gamers get mad about, though, like, let's be honest, there's no G***mers watching a video on fucking Transistor. This loops back to my thoughts on self-insertion in a narrative. The idea that Red chose to sacrifice her life is one that I've inadvertently kept framing as this tragic event throughout this whole review, and while I've had some friends do the same, this isn't about them. It's about this impulse to translate Red's journey into something we can contextualize and understand through our own perspectives. I look at that final scene in Transistor and my heart breaks because she's fought so hard, so bitterly hard, watching everything she knew melt away in a vast sea of empty data, only to reach the end and choose to give it up. Like, that devastated me. And when the credits play and Paper Boats is going off and I'm already distraught, you get this scene.
Hi.
Hey. And this was the 1-2 punch that broke me again, because as much as the visceral moment in the game, that flash of panic, of terror, that I fought this hard, I've been with her this long, and she's going to throw it all away. I mean, he's still there. You've been talking to him, Red. Like, I know exactly why she did it. I mean, not literally. Like, the game story is written in a way that it kind of rejects people mining it for information to catalog on fan wikis, but I know why she did it. You know, she's reached the end of the journey with the power to rewrite the entire city to her liking. The process utterly tamed, defeated, everyone who could stand in her way is gone. Like, actually everyone is gone, at least in the city. She has everything Royce wanted, and I'll get to him, but it's a world without the only things that really mattered. Her voice, her partner. She would never, ever get them back, not really. And this train of thought is kind of scary because it asks you what you'd give up. What is so meaningful, so fundamentally a part of your life that you could give up everything, that you could make the kind of decisions she did. I feel like as much as I kind of want to end it there, it would be a disservice to not bring up one of the other, like, seemingly immaculate things on the table here, so let's talk about the antagonists, and then I think we'll call it a day. So this is loosely about the Camerata, but it's really about Royce. In brief, though, the Camerata are the other more personable antagonists of the story, where the process is the broader threat. It's not really one that you can clash with ideologically. There's no interesting tension between the worldviews of a person and a plague. It does what it does. But the Camerata is the group that put the hit out on Red, the group that killed her partner, took her voice, and set this whole thing in motion, so in looking at the Camerata, you can start to see how much the game works against the expectations set up initially. Like, okay, you do find and take down Sybil, the first member of the Camerata, who's already been mostly processed by the time you get to her, and then her data provides the location for the next set, which is Asher and Grant, Grant being the leader of the Camerata. And, like, by the time you get there to confront him, you know, potentially the genre savvy among you might be expecting this to be some kind of fake-out confrontation, where they'll, you know, come back later as the final conflict, blah, blah, blah. They're both dead before you can reach them. They killed themselves, seeking to not go through the pain of being processed. By the time you get back from them, after the last remaining member of the Camerata, Royce, gets in touch, the city has almost entirely fallen to the process. The world you once traveled through is now alien, lost, taken over entirely, and all the while Royce is begging you to meet him in his lab, taking you through the place as gravity, reality itself seems to bend around you. The city no longer just taken over, but warped beyond human capacity. You finally reach Royce, and he shows you how to stop the process entirely, and it means giving him the transistor. And Red does. She puts the transistor into the cradle, and it sets off this almost hallucinogenic final battle between you and Royce, which culminates in Red winning, recreating her partner's body, sitting down next to him, and killing herself. On the first playthrough, the Camerata came off to me as a setup that had a very clever twist in the second half. Like, you listen to Asho's messages, you read his confession, and if you're still on board with the idea that Red is getting revenge on an evil group trying to destroy her life, making the logical leap that this is some kind of trap, like your partner points out, seems sound. This is even, sort of supported by Royce's dialogue with Red while you're approaching his lab, showing contempt for the direction the Camerata went. Royce, in fact, seems to be working with the Camerata as a means to an end, or otherwise has his own perspective on this group, on Grant, on what the process does, and so what? Not to say I'm dismissing what was written or anything, but, the entire time you go through this, Red's partner is trying to justify their own actions, reframing, recontextualizing everything under the presumption that what they're here to do is... what? Get revenge? Fix things? Stop the process? Stop Royce? Both? Red does help Royce stop the process, and then traps him in the transistor as well. She has full control of the city entirely, and she gives it all up. Everything Royce fought for, and he had good reason to fight for it. It was something he loved, something he fought for, made compromises for, and that is kind of the point. Underneath the simple premise of Transistor is an old school Studio Ghibli sense of humanity under every character, but where a film like Spirited Away or Princess Mononoke invites the audience to empathize with even antagonistic forces in a narrative, Transistor doesn't really let the Camerata's humanity linger. It plays out more like an unsettling undercurrent, the idea that there might not actually be a good, morally pure reason Red is involved here. Sybil claims that they are trying to help her, Asher implies that they wanted to use her, Royce seems to want to bargain with her. The Camerata has an ethos, one that seems kind of reductive and controlling, but it's a sincerely held one. Everyone, it seems, is in it because of a deeply held principle, and we can argue about whether or not those principles are valuable or worthwhile, but at the heart of it, Red's resolution seems intimate, personal, and the fact that she stops the process almost seems incidental to reuniting with her partner.
Hey, Red. We're not gonna get away with this, are we?
Transistor has been, in a lot of ways, a very difficult game to talk about. I feel an affinity for Red that is deeply personal, the both of us being singers that have in our own ways lost our voices. The game hits at something really deep-seated in me. Bastion was a fine experience and a well-told, well-thought-out story. Pyre made me cry because it kind of scratched at a pretty present trauma in my life over and over again. Hades was a fantastic, enjoyable time, but Transistor is the one I sit with. The one that feels like it lives in me on some level. I don't have the luxury of the Transistor to reunite with everything I've lost, and I don't think Transistor is casting judgment on whether or not you should be like Red in a literal sense. What we get to see in her story is how it feels to love something, to be so close to something that it would be worth it to give up everything, and I feel that. I feel that pretty hard as someone who will never get to sing like they did as a kid. I feel that as someone who lives with a phantom of my old voice haunting me, reminding me of what may never be again. I may not be able to be the version of myself that I long to be, but until I see you all in the country, I'll just have to make do with what I've got. was a lot. Okay, special thanks to Brandon Haney, Colleen T, D.R. Baker, Evan Kearns, Lewis Wells, Maria Aladren, Alistair V, Nurai the Redmarked, Pahor, Professor Bopper, and Thomas Volpes.